Duruje chanten tile narodang mami dakpo patu jitingo kadin sunden sawe la mesha sajio la ma yidam chokyong la suwa detso da jin lo gyobengi tome samlengen tape donsun yong la kya tsome kya wa duje chang pa jitingo mbo shabla du tatu samgyo kyo le me jinji lo shi tuje chen Ningi mu perse ne kyan semton de du to pra jin lo hong jin yu jin nu chang san pe ma ge sa thong po la ya zen jo ging ngo drum ye pe ma jung ne she shu da ko du kan do mang pu go ra ke ki je su tha do ke jin je lo ji she su so guru pe ma se de ho ngo min ju ki gi po dang ne tu sun san je kun ji ngo bo ni Asen chukung yung sun ton se pa tsawe la me shabla so wa So welcome back to our short series on the foundations of Vajrayana, whereby the distinctive characteristics of the Vajrayana tradition is the focus of this series. And we are looking at this topic by organizing all the material into these three categories called view, meditation, and conduct. So we are at the point of meditation. We have two more classes. That's when we're going to look at conduct. Just to look ahead a little, conduct, traditionally, when you get to conduct, usually what they're talking about is the vows or the precepts for training. So in a kind of, I would say, inaccurate way, but the easiest way to just get the point across, it's what you might think of as the do's and the don'ts. But whenever we deal with kind of religion, and then we get to do's and don'ts, often it triggers some sort of response in us. Most of us, in varying degrees, have varying degrees of trauma related to religious do's and don'ts. Whether it's actually coming from the religion or coming from our parents or coming from, our surrounding, we tend to kind of flinch a little, when we get to do's and don'ts. So it's really important that we remember, the basic understanding, the basic view. If we get the view, which is what we covered in the first section, if we get the view right, then when we get to conduct, we know how to relate to the do's and don'ts given under conduct. So superficially, the do's and don'ts are going to sound like the do's and don'ts that you have already heard before. So in terms of that, I think there are not that many surprises, the do's and don'ts. Of course, the do's and don'ts within the Vajrayana context is a more specific. And some of the do's and don'ts there, maybe you're like, huh, really? Yes, I can tell you, yes, some of the do's and don'ts that you never even really thought about. But more generally, the do's and don'ts, even though superficially it might look like what you can find in other traditions, here it is really crucial to understand that these do's and don'ts, they are not laws set down by some god, whereby the key point there is an issue of obedience, and that happiness comes when we obey authority. We do what authority says to do, and we don't do what authority says not to do. And then quickly we're in the realm of rewards and punishments. Then quickly we're in the realm of, good boy, bad girl, Oh, good girl, bad boy. Yeah. Then quickly we go into like wanting um, mm, approval. Then, when we have wanting approval, then inevitably rebellion enters the picture, and so on and so forth. But it's crucially important to understand that the Buddha's fundamental point about these do's and don'ts, they are not laws, they are not commandments, but they are what we should call prescriptions and proscription. So immediately this vocabulary of prescription and proscription already places this set of do's and don'ts in the healing medical context. Yeah? So this is about how to take care of ourselves, how to protect ourselves from suffering. Now, of course, the Buddha's prescription and proscription, and what he prescribes, meaning say, you should really not do that. What he prescribes, yes, this is good to do. That set of prescription and proscription comes from him having seen directly how things work. Then from there, he shares with us. This is how things work. This is the nature of cause and effect. These causes produces these effects. These effects in turn tend to determine what future causes would arise. And then you see the cyclical nature of cause and effect. So the Buddha, having seen directly, having realized directly the way things are, then shares with us. Whether we follow or we don't follow, it's not going to affect what the Buddha thinks of you. So he's not there waiting, to approve or disapprove, right? He's not waiting there, to pat your back or to wag his finger. So there's no such figure if you really understand the Dharma. But of course, in Buddhist cultures, when kids are raised, parents probably also subvert that and turn Buddha into kind of a god-like figure. Buddha knows you're being bad. Yeah? In this room, maybe Sering understands that, and Mei Ma understands that. Still, because that's so convenient, right? To kind of put an authority figure up there and say he sees everything, but we don't have Santa Claus, so no Christmas hopes and anxieties. So when we come to conduct, that's usually what is the focus about the do's and the don'ts. And then in terms of that, then on the Hinayana level of self-liberation vows, right? The vows that free ourselves from pain and suffering, that protects us from pain and suffering, there's a set of do's and don'ts. There's a set of prescriptions and proscriptions. Then on the Mahayana level, the level of altruism, the level of doing this for the sake of all beings, there is a set of prescriptions and proscriptions. And then when we come to the Vajrayana level, there's also a set of prescriptions and proscriptions, which I will just kind of generally talk about in the next class. But the rest of the third section on conduct, I'm going to take some poetic license and open up that category so that we also look at some of the symbolism that is used in Vajrayana practice. to look at some of the symbolism, to look at some of the ritual items, to look at the notion of ritual. Like, what is the role of ritual? Why ritual? Yeah. Because partly, um, I'm not supposed to talk that much about the conduct of Vajrayana to like a general audience. Right? It's just considered not appropriate. Right? It's something that people need to kind of have experience for themselves first. Right? The varying levels of kind of seriousness and commitment to the practice before even talking about Vajrayana do's and don'ts. That would make sense. Right? So that's what we're going to be doing in the next two classes. And looking ahead as well, after that, we would have completed this whole course, Foundations of Vajrayana. And at any time, if you want to watch this foundation again, you can go to YouTube and look for the Urban Dharma North Carolina, right? Urban Dharma NC channel. There is an older Urban Dharma that we're not related to that is out in Los Angeles. The real urban. Our urban is a state of mind. Aspirational urban Dharma. The actual urban Dharma has their own YouTube channel, and you're not going to find me on that channel. So if you're looking for this series, you go to YouTube and you look for Urban Dharma North Carolina, and the series is going to be available there. Yeah? So then looking beyond, every Wednesday, there is a group here known as the Kagyu Sangha that practices together. And then when I'm in town, I will lead those practices and also continue to give instructions and explanations. And sometimes we study certain texts together. And often every meeting, again, same time, Wednesday night from 7 to 9, we meet together, do the practice, and then we look at some text or we go through different practices. So what I have planned for right when we finish this is we'll have 3 classes or 3 of those Wednesday sessions where we'll be focused on the practice of the Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion of the 6 realms. So some of you were here this Sunday and learned a little bit about that practice. There's a lot of depth there. So for example, we didn't even get a chance to really talk about the 6 realms, the notion of the 6 realms, beyond what I was able to quickly kind of cover. We talked about the 6 realms as the 6 realms of existence, but then the psychology of the 6 realms and how psychology produces cosmology. You know, that's really the Buddhist view. Psychology produces cosmology. So that the macrocosm, the universe out there, and the universe here, they are not 2 separate universes. In fact, the universe here produces the universe out there. So inside and outside is directly linked. So when we talk about the 6 realms of existence, on one level, yes, traditionally Buddhists will accept that just as right now you and I can see each other as humans in a human realm, the other 5 realms, there are beings inhabiting those realms that we may or may not see. And they may or may not see us as well. I think Western cosmologists, people who study this question of like, are we the only ones here, right? I was listening to, on NPR, some interview with some program about cosmologists and what they study, you know. And so I find it intriguing that there was, I mean, this is like the dummy version of that whole program. They say, one. Of course, for cosmologists, they are not content to say, yep, we are the only ones, in the entire universe. Then that's the end of story. Then nothing to study, right? So these people who study, these scientists who, are looking for life forms out there, there are different theories, and depending on the theory, you go looking along those lines, right? So I think right now we talk so much about, right, when we're looking for life out there, we're looking for what? Do y'all know what they look for? Carbon traces, right? And that is based on the understanding of what we would leave behind, right? So if you have not turned up any carbon traces anywhere, then in conclusion, there aren't any. Well, what about, entities that don't, are not constituted that way? Well, that's sort of my question. But my point was, what was really I find kind of interesting to entertain is that another theory says that it is entirely possible that the other beings that exist are so ridiculously huge that we don't even see them, right? In a way, like an ant can't really tell that you are there, and then suddenly squished. End of story. So our whole universe, as we know it, really could be a speck of dust of someone else's universe, which incidentally, the Buddhist sources actually talk like that. There's a book that came out maybe 10, 15 years ago, Universe in a Single Atom, which is a book, a collaboration between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and a bunch of scientists. Or rather, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is the source of that book, but it's about his reflections on modern scientific discoveries. If you are looking for a book to read before the summer is over, that's a nice book. I like it because I have to confess, I get very annoyed when people make superficial, like, oh, look, Buddhism talks about this too. I get very annoyed by those types of books. I think they are important, and there are some irreconcilable differences between the scientific commitment and Buddhist commitments. I'm okay and comfortable leaving them as, they will not be reconciled. I don't find a need, to reconcile them. And in this book, the Dalai Lama kind of leaves it like that. And so for me, at least, I really like that book, where he says, over here, I don't think so. But, it's my view, Anyway, I don't know how we got here. So, yeah, how did we get here? Sorry? Oh, yeah, cosmology and psychology. That's right. Yeah. So the Avalokiteshvara of the six realms, it really, I think bridges for us that you don't need to stress over, like, are these really out there? If you keep getting stuck in are these realms really out there, then you don't even understand, what's in here. And once you understand what's in here, then what's out there, it's easy. Yeah? So this practice of the Avalokiteshvara of the six realms really is a way to, it's a very vast, profound practice that on the surface looks very simple. Now, let's be honest and realistic, and maybe a little bit of a downer. You're not going to do 3 practices and go, whoa, I get it, It doesn't happen like that. you're not going to get these peak experiences um, with, these practices. These practices really emphasize kind of polishing, polishing, polishing. You're polishing away the, the adventitious, the incidental, the situational obscurations that have arisen. And you really need to polish them away. From time to time, you might have a peak experience in the sense of getting a glimpse of what's really in there, what's underneath all the yuck and the muck, and the crud, right? You might, from time to time, get a glimpse. And those might be the peak experiences. But those peak experiences, they are not realizations. So last week, we talked about the difference between, right, fleeting experiences, these peak experiences, whether it's dreams, visions, physical sensation that might arise. And then the difference between that and realization. The difference between what Tibetan is called nyam and tok. Nyam and tokpa. So nyam is going to come and go. And in fact, nyam arises because of our practice. So if you have those experiences arising, nothing is going wrong. And some of this nyam is what we would label as positive and encouraging. Some of these nyam is what we might label as negative, or like I don't know, I can't handle this. But they are all the result of practice, actually. Yeah? So even something seemingly negative is actually a nyam. And how we're going to handle the nyam is going to decide whether it's just something fleeting and then left behind a bad taste in your mouth, some discouraging suffering, or it's going to result in realization. Likewise, positive nyam could also lead you astray. So in the Zen tradition, they call this makyo, which is demonic states. Literally, in Japanese, makyo, it's like demonic states. Here, demons are not creatures running around out there. In a key text of the Zen tradition called the Shurangama Sutra, at the end of that sutra, I think in chapter 8, they talk about the 50 demonic states. The 50 demonic states are related to the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the psychophysical constituents of our being. And so they are organized into 5 groups. 4 mental emotional, 1 physical. Under the physical, further divided into the elements. Wind, water, fire, and earth. These are properties. Wind is the property of movement. Fire is the property of heat. Earth is the property of solidity. Water is the property of fluidity. And so that's kind of the Buddhist analysis of matter. And in the book, A Universe in a Single Atom, the Dalai Lama admits, he says, the Buddhist analysis of matter is very primitive. It just analyzes it into these 4 elements, and sometimes space as the 5th, and that's it, right? How many members are there in the elements chart these days? 230? Yeah, so lots, right? So it's a very refined compared to the Buddhist one. But then the Dalai Lama says, but the Buddhist analysis of the mind, that we excel, what the West has done. So matter, just into those 4, sometimes 5 elements, and the mindfulness immersed in the body focus meditation that we have started on our Thursday night Open Sangha deals with that issue. And in October, we're going to have a short series of 4 Thursdays, 3 or 4 Thursdays, that will go more in depth into mindfulness meditation, focused on, immersed in, attention given to body. So these 50 demonic states, what's called demonic states, makyo, is when the 5 elements get kind of stirred up, and when a particular, not the 5 elements, the 5 aggregates. And so when they get kind of stirred up in particular ways, then these nyam of various sorts will arise. Demonic states don't come just with horns. Demonic states also come like Buddhists. Last week, right, I talked about Gampopa having visions of the 5 Buddhas. Was really elated, went to his teacher, Milarepa. Milarepa said, you ate too much, indigestion. That's what's causing this, experience. So these things, would arise, but then we have to apply the practice. Practice is that which is going to polish away these obscurations. So often, many of us are attracted to knowledge and information. This culture in particular, right? Knowledge is power. Whether we openly embrace that idea or not, on a deep level, we all believe, I think, that knowledge is always good. There's a lot of good to be said about that attitude. But also be careful that an accumulation of knowledge is not going to bail you out when suffering turns up. In fact, an overabundance of knowledge, when suffering turns up, makes you even more miserable. You know too much. When you know too much, you become cynical. You become too smart for your own good. Even when you go to therapy, you're smarter than your therapist, right? And you can outsmart them because you're playing games. Why are you playing games? Because you're cynical. Because you know too much. And you cannot be helped. Neither by therapy nor Buddhist practice. If you know too much. How much is too much? Don't let someone else tell you that. Now that I'm going in a different direction. Yes? Don't let anyone tell you this is too much or that is too much. But you yourself need to really pay attention. Like, when are you just accumulating more knowledge and information and not applying the practice? Practice is boring. Whoever tells you, practice is exciting, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing. And that's why here we are. Here we are still here, in confusion. I said before, again, going back to the great master Milarepa, I said, I'm pretty sure every one of us in this room know more spiritual information than Milarepa ever knew. I'm pretty sure. But Milarepa, in one lifetime, achieved Buddha. Started off as a murderer. I'm assuming no one started this life this way. I don't know, but I'm assuming. He started off, as a murderer in his teens. Then, he really woke up to, his situation, and then ran away from that life, found his guru, received all the teachings, and sort of ran away from the guru too. Last week we talked about how, right, Milarepa says, better to live 3 valleys away from your guru, Otherwise, after a while, you're going to, pick a fight with, the guru. That's one thing, right? And the other thing is you're going to be over-reliant. Yeah. So either you become over-reliant, you want to be spoon-fed, or you're going to find fault, and often simultaneously. But instead, he says, take the teachings to heart, remember the kindness of the guru, and then go practice. And in the caves, when he was alone practicing, all sorts of difficulties, when they arise, he always, prayed to his guru. Yeah, he always prayed to his guru. But here you have to understand, when we say he prayed to his guru, it's not in the theistic way of expecting then the guru to fix his problems. Praying to his guru meant that his heart turned towards his memory of this being whose qualities that he admired. And then he went back on the path. That's the blessing. It opens up a gap. So there's a strong, very strong kind of heartfelt connection. And that was what sustained Milarepa through all the hardships that he had to go through. After receiving all the teachings. Before receiving, Marpa, his master, put him through all kinds of hardships as well. And then when he left his guru, then the hardships arose from his own side. And this is, so in a way you can say the kindness of his guru was the hardship that the guru put on him. Because at that point, if the guru did not do it for him, it's not going to come up. Then he's going to be stuck like that. But later, when he has developed enough, then he doesn't need his guru to create difficult situations for him to grow. His own practice provided the ingredients necessary for him to grow. That was how he grew. Yeah. So practice the meditation. So view, meditation, and conduct. Meditation and conduct pertains to practice. View pertains to theory, you can say. But it's not theory as like facts or information. A theory that through practice is going to then dawn as realization. Then at that point we said Buddhas don't have any views. On this side of confusion, you need views as a guideline. But when you come face to face with the way things are, then there are no words or concepts necessary. You see things as they are. So even the notion of a view dissolves. So meditation and conduct then, I think generally we like to know enough about how something works, yeah, before we would, attempt it. I think that's, for most of us, are like this. But again, don't the, get information confused with, understanding, and much less realization. Again, when suffering comes, all this information is useless if you have not used the method to change, to polish away the confusion. So there's a funny story. Some of you have heard it before. A few times I've told this, but I see some new people. So in the Tibetan tradition, scholarship is highly valued among the monastic community because it's seen as one of the crucial elements in ensuring the continuity of the Buddha's teachings. So scholarship is really important. And the way scholarship is conducted in Tibet is not writing dissertations. The primary means of conducting scholarship is what? Debate. Yeah? And so they specialize in debating. Then, in particular, of the 4 lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, the Gelugpa lineage, in terms of the training in the seminary, spends the most number of hours each day debating. They can debate up to 6 hours a day. Then in Kagyu Nyingma seminaries, debate is maybe an hour or 2 each day. But in the Gelugpa system, debate at the core. So this debate is highly valued. Now, of course, the ultimate reason for debate isn't about defeating the external enemy. Not enemy, what's the word? Opponent. Yeah? It's not to defeat the opposing person or even the opposing view. The ultimate purpose of debate is to use the analysis and the clear thinking of debate and turn it inwards and to see if you hold those erroneous views about reality. So that's when debate is going right. Yeah? Now, of course, it's also a spectator sport in Tibet. Debate is a spectator sport, like football is. And it's like the equivalent. And so in the debating field, everybody comes to watch, and they get very animated, They get very animated. Sometimes you need to, pull them apart because it looks like they're going to go to fist fights, but it never quite devolves into fist fight. Because part of the debate is to get right in the face of the person and to make them lose their cool. Yeah? So it's also a way to train your emotions. So there's a lot of very good reasons, to use debate as a primary means to train the mind. But even that, there are limits. So this is a story about a young monk who got recognized, in some small village to have this knack for debate. So his local monastery or local temple decided to fund his studies, to go to the capital city to join the great seminaries and to be trained and to earn a name, for himself and by extension for the village. It's very prestigious to have a great debater coming from your village. So this young man goes off, he's already a monk here. He goes off and he goes through his 10, 15 years of education. And indeed, he emerges as a great debater. And he was given a great title, Geshe Larampa. Geshe is when you, in that system, when you finish your training and you pass all the debates, then you become a Geshe, which is like now you are a PhD, you're a doctor of philosophy. Doctor of Divinity. Right? A Larampa is when not only was he examined by one university, but all three of the three great universities in Lhasa. When all three universities, so you go and you get challenged by all three, not just your own. Then you become a Geshe Larampa. Very prestigious. So this monk comes home. He is now a Geshe Larampa. So he comes back to the village. There's a big celebration, big hoo-ha, you know. And all the old monks that were there were so proud of him. Then the thing is, he also got very proud of himself for having achieved this great honor. Yeah. So big celebration. He is put on the main seat at the monastery. All the older monks are seated below him, and people come with gifts and congratulations and partying and this and that. So some time passes, and one day this Geshe Larampa was in the monastery with some older monks. Then some people came looking very hurried, looking sad, and they said, "Oh, Geshe-la, telling this monk, please come because our father is dying." Then the Geshe, kind of looks at the older monks. Then he said, "Oh," and then the monk said, "Yeah, we have to go. You have to go." And so this Geshe Larampa said to one of the senior monks, said, "Can you come with me?" He's a little nervous. So they go and they get there. And by the time they got there, the father already passed. So the whole family is there crying and wailing. And so the Geshe comes and they all go up to greet him. He sits down. The old monk sits down. So then the Geshe looks at the dead body and looks at the family. The family is staring at him, waiting for something to happen. And they look back and forth and back and forth. And finally, he kind of whispered to the old monk and he goes, "What do I do now?" The old monk goes, "Go ahead and debate him." It's like, go ahead and debate him, There are limits, There are limits to the knowledge and the great ideas that we have and how smart we are, When it comes to matters of birth and death, life and death, when it comes to suffering arriving, that's something else. And that can only come from doing the practice. And the practice is polishing away. And it's in the Zen tradition, they say, you just sit. That phrase, just sit. I think maybe the Tibetan tradition can learn some tricks from the Zen tradition in emphasizing a little bit of just sit. I told this before also. One time when I was younger, I went with a group of people in our summer language training in Tokyo. There was one Saturday, you had the option of different things that has been organized for the students, And one option is to go experience a one-day Zen. Of course, I went to the one-day Zen. And we went there and we spent like literally an hour and a half with the abbot, the Zen master, telling us how to eat our lunch. And because it's a very regimented, ritualized meal. And so he went through, I think at least 15 minutes was spent on how to fold the napkin around the chopsticks. Yes, you can spend 15 minutes talking about that. I can tell you that. Then he told us, how to bow, and when you enter the meditation hall, you bow, and then when you turn the corner, you bow, and then when you get to in front of your cushion, you bow to your cushion, and then you sit, and then you turn around and you face the wall, and then then you'll hear a bell, and then when you hear the second bell, then you turn around, and then we're going to have our meals in the meditation hall. And then he says, any questions? Now it's like maybe by that it's like almost like 2 hours into what to do. Nobody had any questions because everybody, including myself, is thinking, okay, when we get to the meditation hall, we're going to get the instructions on meditating. No, we got into the meditation hall, we bowed to the cushions, we turned around, we heard the bell, and that was the last of anything we heard until 45 minutes later, we heard the bell again. And the food came and we ate and everything. And so then we, got the whole thing done. And it's like, okay, now, question and answer with the abbot, back to the other room. And he says, questions? Of course, everybody is like looking at each other. And finally someone said, what were we supposed to do during the meditation time? He said, just sit. I already told you. This is our tradition. We just sit. Of course, he explained, He said, the simplicity of this practice is also the power of this practice. He said, so you just sit. And in that tradition, you also don't close your eyes. You sit and you stare at the wall. And it's a plain wall. It's as plain as it can get. And he said, eventually, you will know what to do. Stare at the wall long enough. After all the falling asleep, of course, there's the encouragement stick, which he did not use on us. Oh, no, wait, that time. No, he did not. Yeah, he knows Americans enough, that there could be lawsuits coming. So encouragement stick is the thing where they whack you on the back, to get you to wake up or more vigor, But yeah, there's something to be said about that. He said, you stare at the wall long enough, that there's nothing else to do, that eventually you are forced to look at your own mind. And when you're forced to look at your own mind, I don't need to tell you what it is about. Yeah? You're going to see what it is about. And then from there, of course, in that system, you would go interview with your teacher. But those interviews is not talking about logic. It's the teacher probing you to see what you're understanding about your mind. When there's nothing else to do. Maybe after a few years of staring at the wall. Maybe after you've run out of all your stories. You've run out of all excuses. You've run out of all distractions. And then finally you see your mind. That's that approach. Not so much in Tibetan Buddhism. Where the strength of Tibetan Buddhism also is, there's an explanation. But at the same time, where the weakness is also, likewise in the Zen tradition, all traditions are basically, have their strengths and weaknesses. So here, I think, especially for the West, sometimes, we think, the more I know, the better. No, just know enough and then really practice. So I met with someone from this class who basically told me sort of their background. And that background is very much so the background of, I said to this person, I said, your background is the typical background of people who connect with especially the Kagyu tradition. So each lineage has its own kind of flavor. Not always, but generally, these are people who, without rhyme or reason, is very devoted to the practice. So this person told me, like back in the 90s, no idea what's going on, get pulled into this empowerment, receive the empowerment from the teacher. The teacher said, you should do this every day. And since then has been doing it every day. Then along the way, receive other empowerments. Before long, she was spending 6 hours a day doing all the practices. Don't know exactly why, but understood that something was happening. Something was going on. And then tremendous kind of devotion. Whenever she heard, the names of Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, she's like, oh, I want to meditate on them. And then even finish the 100,000s preliminary. Interestingly, and never having like a strong kind of teacher figure. I said to her, in my opinion, you got it right. Do the practice. Do the practice. In our quest for finding the right teacher, I'm afraid we're looking for saviors. They don't exist in this tradition. Don't let that become an obstacle to delaying. There's no time to delay, Do the practice. Yes, the tradition emphasizes the importance of this guru figure or this guru principle. But all the great masters will say, you do your practice, then the guru will come look for you. If you go the other way around, you may or may not find the right guru. First of all, right for you. Secondly, not a charlatan. Because there's a lot of power invested in this figure. So there's a lot of people quite willing to play that role and bring, benefit to themselves. But even if you have the good karma of not meeting charlatans, you might not meet the one that has karmic connection with you. And if you insist, if you keep, then it's also going to be unhelpful. So, in terms of the meditation that we have started looking, so these like primarily we've been looking at this song, right, composed by the seventh Dalai Lama, and according to the seventh Dalai Lama, based on core instructions that came to the founder of the Gelugpa lineage, Lama Tsongkhapa, and the Buddha Wisdom Manjushri gave the core kind of content of this song to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then that core is passed down until the seventh Dalai Lama kind of composed this song, laying out the essence. And the essence is not forgetting these four things, right? So the first one is not to forget the guru. And how not to forget the guru? With devotion. So we talked about that, right? Second, what not to forget? Not to forget altruism, bodhicitta. So how to practice bodhicitta? To practice bodhicitta with love and compassion. Right? In that way, not to forget bodhicitta. Then the third is, what is the third? Deity, which is yourself as deity. And more so in Vajrayana, not only that your mind is deity, your body is deity. Really kind of radical. That it's not just your mind is deity, but your body is deity. And so your psychophysical aspects, they are all divine. In fact, the psychophysical, the five aggregates, are said to be the five Buddhas. Then, not to forget, in this tradition is called emptiness, of the profound view of emptiness. not to lose that not to forget that, to have mindfulness of that. And then I said in the Drikung Kagyu tradition, we basically have these four arranged a little differently, and then we add a fifth, which we call, which is dedication, as the fourth. So here I want to look further at this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth verse, yeah, the one that starts with the sky of ultimate luminosity, the nature of phenomena, pervades the mandala of knowable things. Knowable things means, anything that is the object of thought, of mind. So whatever is seen, heard, taste, touch, all those are experienced by mind. So knowable objects meaning things that exist. It's technical language here. Abandoning mental fabrication, look into the essence of empty clarity. Yeah. So this phrase, empty clarity, is really at the heart of deity practice. Yeah? Empty clarity. So empty on the one hand, but yet appearing vividly. Appearing, the vividity of this appearance is said to be unmistaken. So this notion of empty and yet clear, empty and yet appearing, right? We already find this idea in the Mahayana level, represented in the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra, I'm sure most of you have heard this verse, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So already in the Mahayana, we already introduced to this idea that form, meaning that which appear, is empty. And that which is empty appears. In fact, we talked about this under the view. Again, Tsongkhapa says, if it wasn't the case for emptiness, then nothing could exist. And last week we talked about this, right? Because things are empty of an essence, therefore, it is possible. Therefore, it's possible to even appear. So we talked about, right? For anything to exist, the first requirement for prayer wheel to exist is not prayer wheel. Otherwise, if everything is prayer wheel, then you cannot distinguish. So you see how prayer wheel and not prayer wheel are dependent. So this is what we say, dependent arising. They arise. Everything arises interdependently. The notion of here cannot stand on its own, right? How do you have here? Because of there. Yeah? So like you say, is this long or short? Don't answer this question. Yeah? You say, I can't answer this yet. You have to say, right? Yeah, you refine your question. Is this long or short? Don't fall for it, right? Yeah. So is this long or short? Depends on, right? Long or short compared to what? Right? It's either very, very long or very, very short. So notions of long and short, here and there, top and down, they are all interdependent. So everything appears and exists interdependently. Suffering and happiness exist interdependently. And if we don't get that, right, then we suffer. So already in Mahayana level, we already talk about this. But here on the Vajrayana level, that which appears isn't just ordinary appearances. We say that which appears now is deity. It's divine appearance. Now, you say, why? So that you can benefit others. So we're not necessarily talking about, like appearing in these kind of funny forms. And this is just from the particular cultural context that these teachings arose and developed these forms, right? Deity. When we say deity, we have these forms. Now, we say these are not concocted. Yeah, we do say that. So it's different from like say, we decide, hey, next week let's have a meeting. Let's come up with a symbolism of perfection that a committee sat around and discussed. No, right? This form was perceived by a being like you and me who is highly realized, right? And they saw a particular appearance that embodied, like in this case, compassion in action. Lady Tara is active compassion. So her right foot is stepping forward. So this symbolizes she is always 1 foot ahead already, in her compassion. She's already reaching out, right? So this principle of active compassion, realized beings of the past directly perceive this form. And so now this form becomes powerful. But the form in and of itself is not the ultimate truth. It's the way that the ultimate truth has, in one instance, manifest itself in order to relate to those of us on this side of things. So when we say divine appearance, we're not literally saying that, if you practice really well, Mother Tara, right? If you practice really, really well, Mother Tara, one day your grandmother will see you as Mother Tara. Hey, you're looking kind of Indian Tibetan today. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is that if you really, really, really practice Mother Tara and embody that principle through meditating in this way, your grandmother will experience you, if she's a devout Catholic lady, as Mother Mary. Because in her cultural vocabulary, in her religious vocabulary, that's how divine love comes in that form. If you are really practicing deity yoga right, she will experience you in those ways. Yeah, but you begin somewhere. So within this tradition, we don't have deity yoga designed with Mother Mary or Sacred Heart of Jesus. So we're not using those images. What we are using are these deity forms that have come to us from generations of Tibetans practicing, and prior to that, generations of Indians practicing. Yeah, so here we simultaneously train in meditating on the lack of essence. And another way of putting it, the dependently existing nature of ourself, and as well the divine qualities of this absence of self. So one phrase that is used is, the very emptiness that is realized appears as deity. Or, to put it in another way, no contradiction, the deity is none other than love and compassion. But not the sticky kind of love and compassion, where the more you have that, the stickier it gets, the more suffering, possessiveness. But love and compassion, that is the result of understanding interdependence. That kind of love and compassion is what appears as the deity. So for those practices, there are, and the rest of this evening, after the break, we're going to have a break now. I'm going to explain what's known as the two stages of the practice, the generation stage and the completion stage. So we will take a short break and come back for about half an hour, and we'll call it a night. There's a spread of cupcakes and cake and
tomatoes.
and cups and tomatoes, yeah, and hot tea and just socialize. It's good. So, um, so for this kind of like core practice on the Vajrayana level, um, the practice is called deity yoga, right? And if we zoom into this technique or this method of deity yoga, then generally it is said that well, first of all, deity yoga is the meditation practice, and by meditation here, it utilizes ritual, ritual as theater. And when we talk about the conduct part, I will elaborate more on that. So think of ritual as theater, and also think of ritual as therapy. Now, this is not going to be something that is attractive to everyone. Yeah? So it's fine, because the Buddha gave many different methods. But if we are going to kind of focus and adopt like Vajrayana as our main path of practice, then generally you have to appreciate the role of ritual. If you think ritual is meaningless and you approach the practice therefore half-heartedly, or you cut corners, then you are basically depriving yourself of what this method can do if you don't do that. Right? And so ritual as theater or ritual as therapy basically tells us that we go through what is contrived, right, in order for transformation to happen. So there's good theater and there's bad theater. It's good theater when you go to and experience that and you are transformed. So for example, like theater, like the, say a Shakespeare performance, it's make-believe, right? It doesn't strive to be like movie, like what we have on like Netflix movie, But theater, you have people walking across the stage, right? And moving the sets, You're not going to go, wait. Right? You see that there is someone there holding up, a card, that says this is a tree, right? And you go, oh yes, they're in the forest. But if you're going to spend the whole time going, now come on, this is not a forest, then it's not going to work. Yeah, so same thing, like in empowerment rituals, they say, okay, now you imagine, so we say, oh, now you visualize, what this is holding is a palace, and, you have to play along. Because when you do, there is the possibility of some transformation happening. Just like in the same way, if you have a good performance of Shakespeare, right, it evokes sentiments and sensibilities that you ordinarily cannot access so easily. It's the same way, ritual functions like this. So the plainest kind of, so for deity practice, there are so many deities that you could say, okay, I'm going to focus on this one or that one. So for now, as I said, after this course is over, for the next few meetings of the Kagyu Sangha, it will be focused on the four-arm expression of the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara in four arms, and that image there as well, and that painting there as well. Then there is, like Mother Tara, Lady Tara, and then Manjushri, and so on and so forth. So there can be so many different types, different expressions. So these are all what we call peaceful forms. Then there's also like wrathful forms, fearsome, or horrific forms. So when it comes to horrific forms or wrathful forms, this is clearly in the realm of Vajrayana. Up until the level of Mahayana, right? Wrathful, if there are wrathful representations, then they are often considered like unenlightened beings. So there are some protective figures mentioned in Mahayana Buddhism. They are not considered Buddhists. But it is Vajrayana when there are Buddhists that appear in horrific or fearsome form. So the short version of that, the skinny on that is, Vajrayana says, it directly confronts that which is the most painful, that which is the most suffering, and directly confront that and turn that around and transform that. Then of course you say, well, how do you transform? Well, there's no way to talk about it. You have to experience it. Are you going to experience it overnight? No. Unless you're fed some drugs, maybe. I don't know. But that method doesn't exist in Vajrayana. Maybe some other tradition. But in Vajrayana, I can tell you, it doesn't exist. So it comes from slowly polishing it away. That you could be meditating on what we call yidam. So yidam is the term here. Yidam is the meditation deity, often translated as the meditation deity. And necessarily, if it is a yidam, then it is a enlightened being, not like unenlightened being, like some fearsome spirit or anything like that. So it's an enlightened being. And so then you ask, well, how do we know where they came from? Well, according to the tradition, according to the lineage, these are things that the Buddha taught, or these are like pure perception that great masters of the past have come face to face with. Like earlier I mentioned, like from their polishing away of their confusion, they have direct vision of this form. Again, I'm not saying that, that the deity's ultimate nature is Indian looking or Tibetan looking. No, that's just because of the cultural context where these teachings arose. So there was a great Tibetan intellectual in the 20th century, Gendinchopa. He says, because Buddhism appeared in India, therefore the deities to express the Buddhas, to express Buddhas having infinite qualities. So then in Vajrayana, Buddhas are represented as princes and kings and queens with lots of ornaments, and all these ornaments, all these symbols expresses the wealth of qualities that they have. He said, now, if these teachings first arose in China, he said, then I'm sure all the deities, he says, this sort of Tibetan views of the Chinese, he says, then I'm sure all the deities have long beards and are kind of chubby. He said that. Then he said, I'm sure then the description of the Pure Land, and then he said, now if these teachings arose in Tibet, then I'm sure, it will say that in the Pure Lands there are, huge jars of butter tea, placed strategically all over the Pure Land. So he says, because Tibetans love butter tea so much, and that would be the Pure Land. If everywhere you go, you have butter tea readily available. So he says, this is because, in that particular culture, that's what they're working with. Now, before you say, well, then our culture is not these, likewise, Tibetan culture wasn't these forms. These are Indic forms that came to Tibet. So we should not be so rigid as well to say, oh, well, I'm Italian. I don't know. This is kind of weird. All these things can change. It can kind of speak to us in ways that we don't expect. So any of these deities, when you practice their meditation, right, it utilizes chanting, ritual implements. A very rich symbolism is involved. But in terms of the practice, they say there is the generation stage and the completion stage. Generation stage is basically the appearance stage of things. And the main focus there is having a clear sense. In the past, I've talked about this more literally, having a clear image of the deity. But I feel now that actually we're missing the point if we emphasize image. More important than image is a clear sense, a clear feeling of being the deity. So for Tibetans, it's to pay attention to a very rich description of all the details of the deity, right? All the earrings, the anklets, the bracelets, the necklaces, right? All those details, as I said, is comparable to like a very rich telling of what you see in the North Pole, where Santa and his workshop is, right? So this is providing a lot of rich details for something that is already emotionally recognizable, emotionally, very intimate. Yeah. So describing all the deity, all the details of the deity, for an audience that already have this emotional connection with this image, it makes the image come alive. For us who may or may not have this kind of connection with the image, then we need to figure out, and you have to experiment, right? How to have this strong and clear feeling of being the deity. Sometimes it can come rather surprisingly, like almost without any effort. And sometimes it takes effort. So in generation stage, the text is going to describe, how the deity looks, one arm, one face, 4 arms, seated on the lotus. In the lotus, there's a moon seat resting on the lotus, and so on and so forth, and all of that. But the point here is clear appearance. Yes, later they also talk about how the clearer you have your mind on this image, the sharper your mind is going to get. That is training a particular muscle, a particular mental quality on the sharpness of mind. But to emphasize that too early in the practice makes it very daunting and communicates the wrong lesson. It communicates like the wrong take home. It's not about, in one of the Vajrayana texts, I think in the Hevajra Tantra, it says, yogis, meaning meditators, yogis do not train to become statues and paintings. It's that yogis train to become deities. It says, don't let your deity yoga practice deteriorate into having this flat, two-dimensional or even three-dimensional statue. Right? You're not trying to turn yourself into a statue or into a painting. It has to come alive. So that's the generation stage. Then within the generation stage, you not only have like the external appearance of deity, yeah. In more elaborate practice, there's also turning more inwards. So often it talks about how in the center of the body, in specific locations of the body, different energy with different light, with different sounds are emanating, are resounding, radiating. So it's like a move inwards. So they're externally clear, internally clear. And that's what generation stage is. Then that might include the use of sound often, which is mantra repetition. And during mantra repetition, at certain parts, lights are radiating out. And so in the Avalokiteshvara practice of the six realms, that text, if you came on Sunday, you know, it's actually yourself as 7 Avalokiteshvaras. 7, not just one. The central one, in the sense that you think of your consciousness as in the center, and then various aspects of your being manifest as the 6 Avalokiteshvaras surrounding you. 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. And they're facing you. Then they have different colors. The central one is white, as in crystal, not milk, but crystal clear, white. And the front one is also crystal. Green over here, multicolored over here, smoky gray over here, red over here, black over there. And then from there, radiating from the heart, is the mantra, as well as the lights that come with the sound. So it's a sound and light show. So that's the clarity part, that's the appearance part, that's the generation stage. Then after the generation stage is what is called the completion or the perfection stage. And that's when you let all this sound and light and image and form and embodiment, right? Let that all kind of just dissolve. Naturally dissolve, not forcing it. Just let it just release that whole, the first part you hold this all together. So there's a lot going on, but in an expansive way going on. And in various stages of that training, you can also train not just in the expansive nature, but also in the precision. So in generation stage, you can train the expansive part, and you can train also, and you have to train both in the expansive and also in the very sharp, very focused. But all of this is to be done, over years, so that one practice gains depth over time. Ideally. But the problem is a lot of times people are shopping deities. After a little time with this deity, maybe I need another one. Then they go to another one. Maybe I need another one. And go to another one, and another one, another one, another one. Then we distract ourselves, But having said that, I also don't think that it's like absolutely, you have to stick to one. It's all a matter of like what's behind the I'm doing 3, 4, 5 deities. Yeah? If what's behind that is about I'm just going to play with this and then this and this, then of course, if you're not aware of that, then you'll feed that tendency. But if you're aware, and if you're just being honest, right? Like, I've done this for a while, and it's getting kind of no more juice, Then you switch to another deity, ideally in consulting with your spiritual mentor. Then there's no contradiction. These are not different individuals that you'll fall in and out of love with, and then they stalk you, or they complain about you. No, they are all the same nature. They are the nature of your own being. So there's no jealousy going on. So, but generally, you stick with one, and you let that be your main one, because you want to like plumb the depths and the layers and layers of training with that one principle, the one deity. But if you and when you do that really well, even when you are in situations like you go to some place and other people are doing another deity, no contradiction for you. Right? You know that your practice is going well when, even if you primarily focus on one deity, and then you pick up another text of another deity, you can also very easily identify yourself with that deity. With no, like, oh, I don't know. That's when okay, the practice is going well. But if you find yourself hopping, then you really have to ask, what's going on here? Because maybe you don't know how to. You're using a fork like as if it's a spoon. Oh, you're using a spoon as if it's a fork. Then no matter, how many spoons you try, you're not spooning, you're forking with the spoon. It's not going to work so well. So you have to investigate and see what's going on there. In completion stage or perfection stage, you let everything, you relax everything and let them dissolve. And that's when you are training in the emptiness part. But the emptiness part is not a mere absence. It's an absence that is also pregnant with possibilities, with anything capable of appearing at any point. Without, the form doesn't cancel out the emptiness, and the emptiness doesn't destroy the form. It's just what is in the foreground and what is in the background. So even within the generation stage, the truth or the reality of the completion stage is there. Otherwise, you have turned into a statue. You have turned into a painting. And likewise, in the completion stage, where you're not meditating on specific forms, specific sounds, specific colors, specific lights, but rather you're resting the mind and directly kind of watching the spaciousness, the emptiness of that. It's also not the kind of emptiness where if a form, a sound, a smell, or taste, or touch arises, and the emptiness disappears. It's the emptiness that can contain all of that. So the underlying principle of generation stage is always pregnant within the completion stage. And the underlying principles of completion stage is always present within the generation stage. And by training in that way, slowly, the non-dual state, where form is emptiness and emptiness is form, is something that is a constant state of realization that we can abide in. Then, what does it mean? Like, if you cut away all the specialized vocabulary, what happens when we practice this way? Yeah, in simple terms. In simple terms, mm, your experience of things doesn't feel mundane, you don't get stuck with your thoughts and emotions. You're free. Within the context of thoughts and emotions of various types arising, appearing, passing on, and arising, and appearing, and passing on, and moving out, you are not stuck with them. You don't suffer because of them. And neither do you need to stamp them out as they arise, because you will see their arising as divine forms arising. So we say, when you don't recognize your basic nature, then every movement produces samsara, produces the cycle of confusion and suffering. When you recognize your nature, then those movements is the resonance of compassion. So confusion is now the work of compassion. What is confusion? Is the energy of compassion not recognized. Then it becomes possessiveness. I, me, mine. But when there is understanding of the nature, the natural state, or emptiness, according to this song of the four mindfulnesses, when there's the realization of that, then whatever arises turns into what we would call compassion. But compassion, actually, very imprecise word. In this context, the same Tibetan word that is translated as compassion is better translated into English as resonance. That is resonating with sentient beings. It's flowing together with them. It's being with them, but not, confused with them. It's resonance. So sometimes in Dzogchen teachings, one level of one tradition of Tibetan Buddhist the path, it says that the essence is primordially pristine. Its nature, the essence is primordially pristine. Yeah. Its nature is luminous, and then its manifestation is all pervasive. It's all pervasive. Nothing can block it. It's everywhere. This is said to be the three kind of qualities of our pristine nature, our Buddha nature. And the primary method of training in Vajrayana is the method of deity yoga. Then within that context, there are, again, many other refinements within that context, details. Now, bear in mind that in the broader category of Tibetan Buddhism or Himalayan Buddhism, including Bhutanese Buddhism, that the whole cultural area, they don't just practice Vajrayana. They practice what's called Mahayana, what's called Hinayana. And it's not the case that these things are practiced in isolation from each other. In fact, all these different levels, they bleed into each other. So you don't have people going, oh, today I'm doing this. Oh, this morning I'm doing that. But rather, whatever the formal practice, within that formal practice, all these that you have been hearing about, they're all included in there. So a single sadhana, means of accomplishment. That's the practice text, like on Sunday, you've got a practice text. A single sadhana contains all these levels. And all these levels have to be practiced, either directly or indirectly. So, questions or comments?
One comment.
Okay.
Sort of a plug for the Wednesday group.
Good.
Talking about ritual, maybe you really think there's, of course, very important to be practicing at home by yourself and working through these things. But there's something you get when you're doing it with 12 to 20 other people too, which is a very literal resonance with each other that is really special. There's some ways of Buddhism, like just sitting. You can imagine, oh, I don't need anything. I can just do that. But this kind of stuff, I feel like, really benefits from the community of practitioners. Huh? The Wednesday group here.
Kagyu Sangha. There's a secret group, Larry. I'm sorry you found out. We were trying to keep it from you. It's the Urban Dharma Illuminati. Now we have to kill you unless you join us.
Did you know there was a downstairs?
Well, actually, there is a downstairs. Yes.
You're talking about being
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and you see how we have to become very uncompassionate.
Yeah. 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 They say that the wrathful deities is particularly might be attractive to those who are rough. So it's also about attraction. So some people are attracted to Manjushri because they are very intelligent. So the opposite is the situation that you presented, which is also true. But sometimes it's also what attracts you. Yes. And so they work with you from where you expect it to be. And then the transformation happens. Now, of course, the principle of what attracts you and therefore you practice comes with more danger than what you are needing and you don't have, you need to develop of the two. So that's why, like the practice of wrathful deities, they say, unless you get a good guide that guides you along, you can go off in the wrong deep end. Become angrier. Then instead of, anger being transformed, you become, let's say, like the Lord of Death or demon. Yeah. So the wrathful deities, they say, you got to be careful, because it might feed rather than transform the neurosis. But Vajrayana, there's an aspect of Vajrayana, and doesn't mean like because you practice Vajrayana, you got to dive into it. But there is an aspect of Vajrayana which is kind of risky. Yeah? It says, no pain, no gain. At a certain point, you have to confront your demons directly. And now you're supposed to transform those demons into deity. And the classic story of, in many of these tantras that tell about the origins right, of the wrathful deity. Kind of, you could say, like the prototype of a wrathful deity. But they tell this story all using different names, but the same basic story. They tell the story. They say that there was a time where the world was overrun by this one worldly deity, meaning confused, the personification of confusion, called the great God. And this is the great God of I, right? So they say that this God kind of ruled the entire universe, causing suffering everywhere. And the various Buddhas, right? The various Buddhas try to overcome this I, but no success, right? Individually, they all tried, no success. Cannot change, cannot transform, cannot do anything to this, great God. Then finally, all the Buddhists got together. So this is all mythology, right? It's not like Buddhists are having a conference, but the narrative tells it like that, All the Buddhists got together, and then all the male Buddhists, from their heart, a spark of light, they decided to emanate. And all this light, goes in together, and from there, right, a male super Buddha appeared. Then all the female Buddhas got together, and then from a ray of light from their heart came out, and a super female Buddha was produced from the coming together of these two, or all these male and female principles and awakened principles, male and female. Then these two were sent to go take care of this great God that is causing suffering everywhere. And so they say that when they went to challenge him, he was like, ha, 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 like, what can you guys do to me? And so now this story gets a little, what, NC-17 or and what? Yeah, the ratings kind of changed now, okay? Yeah, it went from PG to R to, now it's gone beyond R, okay? So it says that what happened was the female, I think, deity somehow tricked the great God and went like down his throat, I think. Yeah, went down his throat and entered the great God through his throat. Then the super male Buddha went up the other way. Okay? And they two then met at the heart of I. And then went into sexual union, like very explicit language. And that in the moment of their union, in the moment of their coming together, they imploded the great I. And the great I was blown into smithereen. When these two super male and female Buddha was in the throes of, this Buddha orgasm. Basically, that's the language they use. Yeah? Which is totally kind of like in the face of like earlier ways of talking about this process. So Vajrayana is very explicit in that way. Yeah? But then all this is like, talking about the internal alchemy. Like all attempts earlier to overcome this guy was to try to attack or change this guy from the outside. But now from the inside, that this I is going. So it said that then the great God I was blasted into, and that, but then the being, the entity, is said to confess and recognize, the wrong that he has done, the error of his ways. And it said that then the mind got transferred to the Pure Land. But before that happened, this great God said, pleaded to the male and female Buddha and said, one way for me to kind of make amends is, can my body be of any use to your work of freeing beings from suffering? And so then this Buddha, father, mother, male, female, said yes. Then they reconfigured him. And that is the origins of the wrathful Buddha. And then they dissolve themselves, their minds, into this figure. And then they take on this fearsome form. Yeah. Yeah. Any of them, their fundamental kind of principle is this idea of this internal alchemy, that opposing forces are called marshaled together and to be like undermined right at the heart. And so it says they came together right at the heart of this demon, also known as the great God. Yes?
As far as other wrathful deities, I've heard of Buddhist ceremonies that were specifically calling a fever bone as like a trumpet or a noise.
Those are not wrathful deities. Those are...
They offered like their self as being fed.
Yeah, those are just ordinary, nasty creatures.
I was curious, what were other reasons to offer yourself to these wrathful?
Yeah, those are not called wrathful deities because wrathful is a very specific term for the Buddhas. These are just various and sundry kind of entities that cause harm and trouble to other people. So what you might ordinarily call demons. What he's talking about is a practice of like summoning all the forces that want to cause you harm. Now you say, okay, now go for it. Yeah, now go for it. Take whatever you want. This is based on the understanding of the reason why they hate me is because I have caused them harm in the past. It's not random. So rather than keep running or rather than opposing, now say, take whatever you want. But you see, it's not ordinary taking whatever you want. They say you cannot really call them unless you have trained in love and compassion. And that love and compassion has to be trained with an understanding of emptiness. Then you have the power to call them. Otherwise, you can blow whatever trumpet you want to blow until you run out of breath. They're not going to pay any attention because you have no power to call them. Yes? Mm-hmm. Vajrayana is the primordial Buddha. It's a it's principle of the Dharmakaya. Yeah. Vajrayana together with the Buddha Samantabhadra, these are the principle of the unchanging reality. So in theory, you could meditate, of course, yourself as Vajrayana. But in practice, people, there are very few like sadhanas where you see yourself as Vajrayana. Although, yes, the ultimate realization is to realize that you are Vajrayana. Vajrayana as primordial Buddha, we're not talking about an entity that is primordial Buddha. We're talking about our primordial nature is Vajrayana. Vajrayana means he who holds Vajra. And Vajra is this ritual instrument, but it's also a symbol of the indestructible nature. What is the indestructible nature? Emptiness. It's indestructible. Kurukule is kind of semi-wrathful. It says that, if you look closely, she has fangs. But if you stand far away, she looks kind of nice. Reminds you of some people, perhaps?
On the point about what completeness there, on one hand, there's instructions with specific texts about visualizing this dissolving into light, into this.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that is related to that is a very sort of active process. Tonight you mentioned letting that go.
Yeah.
So,
Don't worry about it.
I guess my question is, you think those as the same? Is it more of the like letting go of peace into the next?
Different people need different things. In the Vajrayana bag, there's a lot of stuff going on. There are instructions that are so detailed that it also means, are you going to be that detailed? Maybe, maybe not, Try it. Try it and see what happens. So, we should end tonight, again, with a dedication. So tonight, maybe the dedication can be 172, is it? Or 42? 142. So this is the 8 verses of mind training. This is a teaching, 47. Yeah, 147. And this is actually an instruction given to how we should train our mind, train our heart, train our attitude. But here at Urban Dharma, since the day we started, we have also used this as a way to dedicate. So meaning now you think, whatever good, whatever positive energy, power, ability that have been gained by being together here, learning about this topic, we dedicate all of that to the work of changing our minds, transforming our minds. One word about this is that the words, the expressions given in this 8 verses of mind training, if we are not careful, it might sound like we are saying that we're going to train to become doormats. But it's actually not. It actually comes from, or it should come from, this level of toughness, this level of confidence, so that you're not afraid to say, let me be the lowest among all. So it's not like, because you feel defeated, then you say, oh, let me be the lowest among all. But that you are so fearless that you don't fear being the last and being the lowest and being the least useful. Not because out of a sense of being defeated, but in fact, out of a sense of, absolute confidence. Then it says, doesn't matter if I'm the lowest. Doesn't matter if I'm last. Because I know, how I can truly achieve happiness, not just for myself, but for others. Start.
With the
to accomplish the highest welfare for all sentient beings will surpass even a wish-granting jewel. May I train to hold them as supremely precious. Whenever I associate with others, may I train to think of myself as the lowest among all, and respectfully hold others to be supreme from the very depths of my heart. In all actions, may I train to search into my mind, and as soon as a negative emotion arises, endangering myself and others, I will firmly face and avert it. May I train to cherish beings of bad nature and those who are oppressed by strong sins and suffering, as if I have found a precious treasure very difficult to find. When others out of jealousy treat me badly, with abuse, slander, and so on, may I train to think on all loss and offer victory to them. When one whom I have benefited with great hope unreasonably hurts me very badly, may I train to feel it also as an excellent spiritual guide. In short, may I train to offer to everyone without exception all help and happiness directly and indirectly, and respectfully take upon myself all harm and suffering of my mothers. May I train to keep all these practices undefiled by the stains of the eight worldly conceptions, and by understanding all phenomena as like delusions, be released from the bondage of attachment. Thank you. See you next Wednesday.